Hi, it's Jerry Roberts. It is Thursday, July 30th. We are back with another episode of Newsmakers, The Plague Year. And today we're talking about policing and policing specifically in Santa Barbara City and County. And our guest is Tyler Hayden of the Santa Barbara Independent, news editor of the Santa Barbara Independent, who's been writing a lot about that. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, my take on this is, sort of broadly, that one of the hardest things to do in journalism, specifically now with, less and less resources, is to follow a big story. We often do a really good job about following the breaking stuff and what happens. And then, the fallout and what happens afterwards, we don't see. So a month ago, we were all talking and reading about Black Lives Matter and policing and so on and so forth. And now we've kind of moved on because we've got a resurgence in the virus, and we're talking about that. But you have done, I think, really admirable work in staying on the story in terms of some of the aspects that were raised by Black Lives Matter and so on, and really following up with what really is going on with policing in the city of Santa Barbara. And one of the things that's interested me about the stuff you've been doing is you've done a series, I guess, of Public Record Act request to the police department about specific cases. Can you talk about just sort of what that project is?
Yeah, so as you said, this all kind of bubbled to the surface a month ago in the wake of George Floyd's death, and sort of a resurgence of attention on how police how they interact with the public, how and when they use force, when push comes to shove. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's funny. It's like this is a perennial ongoing issue and question, but it's like there's these sort of flashes of attention that it gets, for better or for worse, that sort of, are at the forefront of the public's mind, and then ours, and then we move on to something. And so what I'm trying to do this time, and I've forced myself to do it in a way by how I've gone about putting in these records requests, is going sort of back in time and trying to track and trying to study serious use of force incidents going back to 2010. And so what I did is I put in, as you said, California Public Records Act requests with both the police department and the sheriff's office. And the response I got was, this is going to take a while, but would you like us to release records on a rolling basis as we get them ready for you? Because they have to redact certain things, they have to compile them, and it's a major job on their part. I mean, we can't deny that. So I said, sure, give me what you get when you get it. And that has sort of allowed me to, instead of waiting till October and do one major dump, 6 months after this has been, a real attention-getting issue, I'm getting these sort of complete reports, but on a weekly or bi-weekly basis from both departments. It's interesting. The sheriff's is starting back from 2010, and the police are starting most recent and working back till 2010. So I guess I'll meet in the middle at some point. And it's been a really interesting exercise for me, as you said, to stay on this story as other things keep popping up. I mean, even today, I'm trying to work on another incident, and I'm reading through 500 pages of notes from the sheriff's office, and we just got a tip about a pretty big embezzlement scheme that now I have to jump on, and that's happening right now, and somebody just got arrested. So, but I think it's going to be valuable in the end to have this compilation of pretty in-depth reports on these instances, and I want to make it clear, there's no suggestion that officers acted wrongly in any or all or some of these. I'm just giving the facts as they were when they happened and as they were compiled by these law enforcement agencies. I mean, there's there's ways to read sort of in between the lines, I think, on some of the incidences, and they talk to other issues like homelessness and mental health problems. But I think it's going to be good for the public to see these all laid out by the end.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when I was still working in the business and we would do these reader surveys. That was one of the top complaints that people had, other than don't throw my paper in the weeds at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was, well, I remember all these front page stories, and then I never found out what happened
Right.
about it. So what's been the, sort of the general attitudinal response of the sheriff and the police department to these? Are they cooperative? Are they feeling threatened by it? What are they?
They have been super cooperative so far. I mean, I will say both the sheriff's office and the police department helped me craft my Public Records Act request in such a way that they would be able to be quickly and fully responsive. They said, we kind of get what you're asking for, but you might need to word it this way so that we get you exactly what you want. It was like, okay. I mean, that's not normal. I mean, I've had the opposite reaction.
Yeah. I mean, I've been sort of struck throughout all this, even though they've been under attack as part of a class, law enforcement, that does, the chief particularly, but also I think officers have been pretty open and non-defensive about all that's going on. When the council a couple of weeks ago, and you wrote a story about this at the time, adopted this resolution declaring racism to be a public health problem, and also calling for a police review process. The resolution that they adopted had a number of anecdotes in it about police force brutality and so on. None of them were local. And so it's interesting to me that we really haven't heard a lot about specific cases. But one thing you wrote about recently was the Francisco Alcaraz case, and this was a big deal at the time. It was last year. They closed the freeway both ways for a while and used a SWAT squad to go in on the guy. And that was it was a really large and complicated investigation, it looked like. So what did you actually get? You got documents, you got audio, video, body camera stuff. What do you get when you get these requests?
Good question. So I get all of that pretty much. So I get video if it's available from either patrol cars or body cameras. Audio sometimes is the only thing available from the body cams. I get coroner's reports. I get the final DA's investigations. I get witness statements, individual officer statements, the shooting team review, which they do anytime there's at the police department anyway. I haven't gotten that from the sheriff's office yet because I haven't. They just haven't had them ready yet. So it's like a huge compendium of stuff, and it takes a really long time to go through. I mean, it is sort of tempting in a way to go through just the final DA's report, but I've found that they don't put everything in there. There's some details and there's some color to the incident that aren't included, not because they did that to hide anything, but they don't seem to be as comprehensive as maybe you and I might think. There's other stuff in there that I think is interesting and important to get
So when you read these reports and you try to pull together all the multiple data points about an incident like that and what's happened, have you found that in the language or the emphasis is played on things, do you get the sense that police officers are trying to shade the truth or push forward a particular narrative, or is the language and the narrative pretty constructed right around the facts?
Just the facts, ma'am. Yeah, it's pretty straight. It's pretty by the book. The police reports anyway. Where you start to get some interpretation is in the final district attorney's report on whether the shooting was justified or not, or whether the use of force was justified or not. That tends to emphasize certain aspects of the incident or the investigation and downplay others. I mean, there's one I'm working on now where a man was shot and killed up in Santa Maria in 2011 by sheriff's deputies. And it was a really bizarre, sad incident where he was going through some kind of psychotic break and was shouting and yelling at himself. And someone called the police. When the police arrived at his house, there was a confrontation. They actually went inside, and there's questions over whether they should have done that or not. But they said they feared for the safety of this individual. His mom was in the house with him. It's pretty messy, and happened very quickly. But it's interesting in the district attorney's report about how the shooting was justified in their eyes. They talk about this guy's criminal past, but his criminal past is like a couple speeding tickets and an alleged resisting arrest that actually got dropped. And if you start to dig a little bit deeper, you find that this guy claims that he was beat up by law enforcement in San Bernardino during one of these speeding tickets. And he has a real animosity towards police because of that. So the way they frame that dynamic is not completely straightforward, as it is in the raw reports themselves.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other things you did, it was a cover story, I think 2 weeks ago, is that you, I guess via social media, invited citizens, just regular people, to send you little anecdotes about their own interactions with the Santa Barbara Police Department, whether good or bad. And I think there were 40 of them or something like that. And you presented it as, look, this is nothing, this is not crunch data or anything.
Yeah.
It's a series of anecdotes. Yeah. But what was your overall takeaway from that? Were you able to draw any conclusions about, whether, the police department is acting pretty much as a protect and serve operation or not? Or were there differences of race or anything that you were able to discern?
I mean, my main takeaways, and it covered not just the Santa Barbara Police Department, but the sheriff's office too. Right, yeah. And there was some
CHP, I think.
CHP, yep. So my takeaway from that was the police department, our SBPD, is generally considered, I would say, a upstanding, honest law enforcement agency. I mean, there will be arguments against that, but that's what a lot of people said to us. That's what I've heard anecdotally before and after that. I think there's quite a different culture at the sheriff's office as far as their interaction with the public and kind of that customer service element that comes with talking to people every day and interacting with them in often fraught situations. So I can't say there was like any damning conclusive evidence against either the sheriff's or the police department. But as you said, that wasn't really the point. This was sort of like people's general everyday impressions of their interactions with these agencies. And I mean, my thing was that, these are organizations that are staffed by people, and they have people problems like any other company or organization does. And sometimes that flares up in minor ways with, people being spoken to rudely or unprofessionally. And then other times it flares up in much more dramatic ways. That story kind of focused on the former, is sort of just those everyday interactions. And I think that for the most part, our law enforcement officers do the best they can with what they got, and they're well-intentioned, but I think there are those bad seeds, and I think there are flaws to the system because it's a human-made system and we're all flawed human beings. So it's I don't think there were any massive surprises that came from it, but I think it's a good piece of the conversation as we're talking about this, and as we're talking about police review boards, citizen review boards, and as we're talking about oversight, and as we're talking about whether we should have more cops with guns or have more social workers and more sort of co-response type things. I think there were elements of those questions in there too.
Yeah, of course, one of the fundamental assertions in the Black Lives Matter critique is that there is systemic racism in policing and police departments everywhere. What have you, and I realize, we're two white guys talking about this, so it's maybe we're not the most expert, but a number of the anecdotes that you gathered were from people of color who had that. Where do you sort of come down on the, do we have systemic racism in local policing, or is it a few bad folks and it needs to be fixed with reform? I mean, that's kind of a continuum.
Yeah, I think that does exist here, but I think it exists pretty much everywhere. Not only in law enforcement, but as I think white guys like us are learning more and more, and a lot of other elements of society. So I think the police department and the sheriff's office do have that problem to deal with, but I think they do go through anti-bias training. They do try to address these incidents as they come up. But I also wonder, how hard they're working at it to root out the foundation of sort of these systemic issues. And it's funny you say that. I recently asked for a copy of the anti-bias trainings that the police and the sheriffs get, and I'm in the middle of taking the anti-bias training that the police do. Yeah, and there's a test at the end of it. So I'm going to see how I do and write about that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And it's funny because the paper just went through its own anti-bias training. I don't know how much I can talk about that in my story because it was a closed confidential session. But it'll be interesting for me just to kind of personally compare the two. And then I think it'll be interesting for the public to hear about what they actually learn, what they are taught and are supposed to learn.
Yeah. Let's talk about that police review issue for a little bit, because that was one of the demands of Black Lives Matter, was that, they asked for the county through this city council, so there was some jurisdictional question there, but whatever. They would like to have set up a independent or quasi-independent, and the city council has agreed with this, process for reviewing the kinds of incidents that you talked about. But it's really unclear about what the scope of that is. And the city attorney, the staff provided sort of a range of options of different things. It kind of ranges from, well, you would have really an independent agency that's independently funded and has its own investigators to look into this stuff.
And subpoena power and all that. Yeah.
Right. To, we'll have an auditor take a look at what the chief does.
Right.
So basically what happens now is if there's questions of discipline or force or something, it goes through an internal affairs investigation, as I understand it. So can you sort of talk about where we are now in that process of setting up a police review process?
Very early on. We've taken the first baby step towards creating, it's like we're kind of creating a committee to create a subcommittee to then talk about forming a blue ribbon commission. It's sort of on that spectrum. But right now, the council has assigned 2 council members, Megan Harmon and Alejandra Gutierrez, to put together a community group. So representatives of different neighborhoods, different interests, different stakeholders. And they are going to start the process of deciding what kind of review board we should get. As you said, there's sort of a continuum of different options. They're going to take public input. They're going to hold neighborhood meetings. I don't know how down into the weeds they're going to get with, what funding options there are and what are the budget for this kind of thing might be. I have a feeling it's going to have to get kicked back up to the city council before they even start drilling down into those details. But so it's going to be another year or 2, I'm guessing, before this gets fully implemented. But as I said, they're going to start talking about whether we want that expensive, highly trained, and highly, and more powerful, frankly, subpoena power board, or we just have sort of a more review system. Or there's also hybrid options, where you have maybe a investigator that looks at just shootings and uses subpoena power in those, and then you, on the other hand, just have a review board for less lethal use of force incidents. So there's different options that they're going to be looking at, but it's going to be a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the reading I've done on this suggests that it's not altogether a bad thing that it is going to take a while.
Right.
Because you want to get it right, because the fundamental issue we're talking about is trust between the community and law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kind of, we're going to do this and we rush something through,
Yep.
it can make the situation worse in a way, because now you've created a board that's supposed to be accountable to the public.
Right.
That nobody takes seriously or nobody trusts. So,
right, exactly. Or they don't have the authority to do what, the public thought they were going to be able to do, or they go too hard the other way and they get all of a sudden a bunch of resistance from the police and the police union when they're trying to put something together. So yeah, I think it's smart for everyone to be moving kind of slowly and tactful on this. But it's one of those longer term things where everyone was excited about this a month ago, and it's going to take a long time for it to get actually implemented. And Megan Harmon, Councilmember Harmon, said something to that effect when they were talking about it. She said basically, like, bureaucracy is not sexy, and this process is not going to be as quick as you may want it to be, but we're going to see it through, and we promise to listen to everybody's voices and take all kinds of input. And I think she and Alejandra are a good choice to do that. I think they have a lot of connections in the community that will allow them to get sort of that diversity of opinion.
Hey, one thing you reported early on that sort of stuck with my mind is the increase in the police budget, which is about 32% over the last 10 years. What have we gotten for that? Is that basically just salaries and benefits for officers?
It's a lot of that, because in that time, actually, our total number of officers on the street has gone down. So a lot of that increased cost, is pension, is salary, rehabbing the fleet, we have got, new cars and new motorcycles and new assault rifles and a Bearcat, the big armored tank, and that kind of thing. But no, it's interesting. It doesn't translate to a new police station, which we still need, or more officers or more patrol cars. And that's a whole other long-term story that needs following,
Well, because the politics of it, not just in Santa Barbara, just, everywhere. And, it's not a big secret. The police unions, to a large extent, have been in bed with the politicians, contributed a lot of money, helped them, not only gotten good contracts, but I think to a large extent have gotten support for their position on issues like the police. Have you had conversations with the local POA and those folks? Or how are they feeling? What's their morale?
So at the beginning of our conversation here, we were talking about the reaction from the police to my stories. And overall, the management at the PD has been very supportive and forthright and interested in helping me tell these stories and get the information. And I even was a little bit hesitant to include the names of officers in a couple incidents, because it was either from a long time ago or I was concerned about their safety potentially. And I heard from a couple lieutenants like, hey, we understand what you're doing. We understand the public's right to know. We're not secretive. We have nothing to hide. We don't want you, not disclosing officers' names, because there's a reason we have our names on our uniforms and we have badge numbers, because we're not in the business of keeping things secret. And if someone is trying to operate secretively as an officer, they shouldn't be a cop. So I was actually sort of struck by that. They said to go for it. And but where I got resistance was from a high-ranking member of the Police Officers Association, the POA, and he basically said that I'm kicking the police while they're down, and that he was going to talk to my editor, and that basically question my entire intention and motive for this. And I actually reached out to him a couple times and said, I'm sorry you feel that way. Maybe we can grab a cup of coffee. I'll bring my boss, Nick Welsh, because you guys kind of know each other, and we can hash this out. no response. And then I got word from someone else that they were thinking about putting out some kind of statement that the media is going after them, that we're fake news. So I can't say the union has been very as amenable to this kind of public interest reporting as the union has. I mean, as the brass have, the management at the police station.
Which, seems
Kind of makes sense.
Which, yeah, it does. I mean, as a political matter,
Totally.
it
Totally.
does, at least to the extent politics makes sense. So just real quick, so there's a rumor out there that Chief Lunau may be retiring sooner rather than later. You hear anything about that?
I've heard that too. I don't know what's real and what's not. I will say I kind of hope she doesn't. I think she's been a good thing for the department. I think there's been some grumblings that she hasn't been as maybe present as some officers were hoping she would be. She had some personal things in her life that kind of kept her out of the station for a little while. But I think as far as how she thinks about policing and her sort of whole philosophy about community interaction and trust building, and just she has a sort of very modern way of addressing some of this stuff. That would be a drag to lose. I mean, I think back to a few years ago when she was getting kind of grilled by Frank Hotchkiss, former council member Frank Hotchkiss, and he was basically saying, "Oh, why don't you just arrest all the homeless people who are out on State Street? What are you doing? Why are we wasting our time?" And she got figuratively kind of right back in his face and said, that's not what we do. I'm not going to infringe on anyone's rights because you want to see State Street look different than it does now. And I was really kind of impressed by her honesty and directness about that. And I mean, she wasn't stating like her personal opinion. She just was restating the law, and the constitutional rights of people to push back against this kind of hardline anti-homeless rhetoric that was coming from him. And it was cool to see a chief do that and not be afraid to do it.
Yeah. We got a big controversy going on about masks now and whether to enforce the mask requirement. I imagine the cops are really pretty eager to do that. Huh?
Yeah, they're stoked. Yeah, I don't know. I feel for them in that respect, but I also wish they would be more willing to kind of lay down the law a little bit. I think we need some of that.
Yeah. Hey, listen, thanks for your time. Real quick, the last time you were on, we were talking about the Lompoc prison and the outbreak there, and I know you got a follow-up there about how it happened, but that seems to have calmed down. Is that pretty resolved now?
Yeah, the active cases are way down. We haven't been hearing nearly as much from, the inmates themselves or their families. So there's not that crisis situation up there as there was a month or two ago. But I think we'll still be hearing for a while of what the hell went wrong, why there was so many deaths and hospitalizations, why they didn't act quicker. And that Department of Justice report, I think that scratched the surface, but I think there's going to be a lot more coming from that. I'm curious to see how the ACLU lawsuit plays out. And, once they start getting more information and if it goes to trial or not.
All right. Tyler Hayden, news editor of The Independent. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk, and thanks for your work. And we'll let you get back to your 500 pages of your latest Public Records Act request.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Thank you.